Hello and welcome to She the People's Women's Writers Fest. This panel is titled Women Writers at Home. With us are three amazing authors from three different parts of the world. So, first up, we have UK based author, she's based in London, Selma Carvalho, who has come out with her debut novel, Sisterhood of Swans. Her work explores themes of migration, memory, and belonging. She's the author of three nonfiction books. She's also the editor of two volumes of The Brave New World of Goan Writing and Art. We also have with us Rijula Das, who is joining us from New Zealand. A Death in Shonagachi is her first novel. She has received a PhD in creative writing in 2017, and from Nanyang Technology University, Singapore, where she taught for 2 years as well. We also have with us Shabnam Khan, who is a South African author and artist. Her first novel was titled Onion Tears, and it was shortlisted for the Penguin Prize for African Writing and the University of Johannesburg Debut Prize for Writing in English. She holds a master's degree in English and has been selected for a number of literary fellowships. When not traveling, Shabnam lives in Durban, writing and drawing a living. So I welcome all three of you here, and thank you for doing this for She the People. And I'm really interested in this combination of London, New Zealand, Durban, Mumbai, and talking about how writing is changing. How women's writing is changing the world of literature, and what are the new themes that we are bringing, and how being at different parts of the world has influenced your writings. So first, I'll go to Salma, and Salma, to you, I would like to ask: do you think women writers of the what we call the diaspora is an independent identity, or it is more of a mixed bag of different identities?
Well, I'm not entirely sure that there's a women's writers of the diaspora. I think for me, being in Britain, the identity is more the BAME tag, which is Black, Asian, and minority ethnic. So that is an identity. And it's an identity that has its advantages, but also its limitations, because yes, there are call outs specific to this identity from publishers or competitions or agency call outs. And those are meant to engender opportunity for the BAME community. But it also has its limitations in terms of BME is not a homogenized community. You know, we're unique. We have our own unique experiences, and so when you pigeonhole people like that, there's also a subtle expectation that a certain type of writing will emerge from this community, and that is a bit unsettling, because as writers you want to explore as many diverse topics and areas and emotions as you can. And so a lot of writers, I think, are also struggling with this BAME um, label. So as far as I'm concerned, personally, I'm a writer first. I have my own experiences, which are unique, and hopefully that's what I bring to my writing.
Right. That's a wonderful thought. So I'll go over to Shabnam here, because your work is part travelogue, part memoir, where you talk about your own identity as well. And you, so Shabnam, what aspects you think, what aspects of your writing have gotten influenced by the places that you have been to, you have stayed, and just take us through that.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, I think in terms of growing up, it hasn't been so much about where I've been. So I grew up in South Africa. I'm in Durban, but I was reading British books. But I was reading about Enid Blyton and the Famous Five and Roald Dahl, and um, I think it really depends on the kinds of books that were available. And at that point in my childhood, in the early 90s, those were the kinds of books available. So I think influenced very by British writers, and but then also, interestingly enough, my grandfather would tell me stories when I was young, and he came from India when he was 12, so he was giving me childhood stories that he had heard in India. And so that influenced the kind of, I would say, the kind of imagination I cultivated, which was sort of like these, he would give very moral Aesop tales about, the fox and the grapes. And so even though I was here in South Africa, I would say in my childhood, I wasn't getting very much like traditional African stories because of the people I was surrounded by, and then what the library had available to me. And that's very interesting, because that question makes me think about how was I influenced as a child, because I think that's influences your writing, for years to come as an adult. Um, and then a lot of my memoir is about me traveling to different places and me reacting in those places to who I am. So, I've got a small story about me living in China. And at that point, I was going through a lot of like grief and depression, and I was learning to become soft, and I was learning to get to know myself, because in China, I felt very lonely and isolated, because I didn't know the language, I didn't know the culture, and so I had to withdraw to myself. And so I got to know myself better. I feel like I was softer with myself, and I healed a little bit in China, even though I was so lonely. So I think that's how my writing was affected by the places that I was in, and that happens in various places throughout the book.
Uh, Rijla, if you talk about your book is, I would say, a noir. Insert it talks. So, you know, for a long time, it has been considered that women are not the people who should write noir, and uh, where. Why do you think there's so much stigma, and what has been your experience with the book? When you're thinking about it, how it came about.
Yeah, thanks for asking that, Deepshika. I don't think that authors set out to write a book in this genre or that genre. I honestly don't do believe that, unless obviously you're a romance writer or you're a thriller writer or something like that. I think a lot of us writers who are primarily functioning in some dimension of literary fiction are just writing books, and then eventually in the publishing journey, somebody says, this is how we're going to position the book. And I don't think the writer necessarily has a lot of say in that. But I also I've been thinking about the idea of genre ever since my book came out, because I've heard quite a few talks about what genre this book is, and, whether it's a murder mystery and stuff like that. But I come from a very long tradition of reading Bengali literature, like Shabnam was saying about, childhood influences and Russian literature, because Bengal was communist for 36 years. We kind of grew up on a very steady diet of Bengali children's fiction and Russian and Ukrainian children's fiction translated into Bengali, other than our British influences. And I know that in regional literatures, in Bhasha literature of India, we've never really worried over much about the genre of a book. There's been stalwarts of Bengali literature who've defined literary taste for generations, who've had successful series of YA thrillers and adventures and mysteries. And I think that our preoccupation with what a genre is quite a recent Anglophone perception that we have, and preoccupation that we've kind of now sort of imported. But there is also the flip side of books that are coming out in primarily English speaking markets, where people are doing all sorts of interesting experiments around the idea of genre. Like it's spilling out and sort of subverting our expectations. As a reader and a writer, I find that quite interesting. And I think it's the same as saying women writing genre, women not writing genre. Is all of these are labels that I don't think necessarily have that much to do with the creative process. Like ultimately, you tell the story as best as you can, and then somewhere in the process, it gets labeled to be a certain kind of book. So that's sort of my feeling about it.
Salma, I'd like to come back to you here and talk to you a bit about, how you have touched upon the idea of single motherhood in your book. And, if we are to look it from the perspective of the identity of growing away, a bit away from your own home country. So, what do you think I mean, single motherhood, single parenting is difficult. There's no denying about that. But what are the problems specific to it when it comes with the identity is what I would like you to discuss with us.
Yeah. For me, uh, an unresolved issue, and particularly an issue that's at the fore of this book, is sort of the loss of sexual agency that women have encountered over the last decade or so, I would say. And single parenthood is one of them. We know statistically that single women are much more likely to fall into poverty very easily. They become the sole carers of their families. They struggle with going ahead with secondary and second home relationships. Um, and the premise of the book is that men carry on. They go on. They go on to have uninterrupted lives. They have a second families. They don't encounter sort of financial peril the way women do. Now, I think if you live in Britain, you're not really conscious of your identity as such in terms of being a single parenthood, because I have single friends who are English. I have single friends who are Pakistani. I have single parent friends who are Indian, and so I think the commonality in all of that is the struggle you face, how very difficult the equation, the sexual equation between men and women is, and inevitably it disfavors women. So that is an issue. Writing is all about unresolved issues, and that's an issue that I kind of grapple with. Even within sexuality itself, I think women have come to be disadvantaged. If I can very briefly give a very brief example, the pill in the 60s rightfully liberated us from monogamous relationships, from sex that was geared towards procreation. So it was a step forward for women. But that has turned on itself now, because there's a kind of a climate created in which women are expected or subtly coerced into having casual relationships, and instead they become almost an object of a ridicule if they expect committed relationships. And so I can't say there's anything specific to being Asian. I think it's something that women all over the world will face increasingly. So yes, I think the equation is not exactly equitable in sexual relationships. And I think the book kind of explores that. And that's not to make men out to be toxic or evil. No, men are a fundamental part of our lives. It's just looking at how we can maybe rebalance that equation.
That's Uh, uh, and I mean, since you touched upon this topic, I need to go to Rijla as well as Shabnam and take their opinions on this, because Rijla's book, I mean, sexual agency, sexual lives, bodies, how women have agency over their own bodies is kind of part of central to what Rijla is talking to her book. So, Rijla, if you would like add anything to this conversation here.
Yeah, I think that agency is agency and choice, like there, which is something that my novel is talking about, is more. It's a lot more complex in people that at first glance appear oppressed and are, and that you don't have to be a sex worker in against your will or having trafficked to have lack of agency or sexual agency. I mean, you honestly don't have any sexual agency if you're a wife and a mother without any financial means of sustaining yourself. Not a lot of wives and mothers in traditional Indian societies have sexual agency. It's just that I mean, I'm just saying that you don't have to be completely marginal to lack sexual agency. Women generally in our society lack sexual agency, but I think that that's where I'm interested in, because I don't think it is a black and white issue. It's not something that you have or you don't have. I think we do create agency and choice every single day in very small ways that may not be very apparent to what we understand as agency. When we, the ability to be able to use the words agency and choice are a sign of privilege, and for people who are not using those frameworks and those words also have agency. And I mean, I think as a writer, I'm interested in women. I primarily read women authors. It's not it's not a manifesto thing. I just find what women have to say a lot more interesting a lot of the times. So I'm primarily working there, and I'm very interested to understand the shades of agency that we create every day and sort of fight against. It's a continuous fight, whether we realize it or not, in situations where we have only this much room to move. So where we can go, where we have that little room to move, and whatever those circumstances are very exciting to me as a person and as a writer.
So, I mean, this brings me to Shabnam, and I would like her to talk to us about her book cover and the story behind the picture. Um, so there is an underlying angle about agency there as well, I would believe.
Yeah. So the title of the book is How I Accidentally Became a Global Stock Photo, which is one of the stories in the book about these, I would say, weird and sometimes strange and sometimes wonderful situations that I experienced. And so one of the main stories is how I'd lost this photo of mine. And I only discovered it about 2 years later when a friend in Canada saw my photo in an advert for immigrants coming into Canada. And she put it on Facebook and she said, "Is this you?" And I said, "Well, I think it is me, but what am I doing in an advert in Canada?" And um, we we did a little bit of investigation, and I realized it was photos I had taken with a group of friends when we were in university about the 2 years prior. And at the time when we went, it was a lot of us who went from university because it was advertised as this art project. And we got a portrait of ourselves, just of our faces, that we could use by a professional photographer. And I thought, oh, I'll have a professional photograph. This will be nice. And I did sign a document at the beginning, and I thought it was for him to use it for his portfolio. But when I contacted him after I saw myself in these adverts, he said that it was, we had signed it away as stock photos, and we didn't know this. So, I did a reverse Google image search, which is where you take the photo and you put it into Google. And I found myself in adverts in, London and New York for teeth whitening and makeup, and McDonald adverts and book covers. And I was, they changed my name. So I was leading treks in Cambodia and selling travel packages. And I was for foster care, and then for acne adverts, they'd put a name and say, during my pregnancy, I had so much of acne, and then they'd Photoshop it off and say, now my skin is clear. And, it was just overwhelming, actually. And then I laughed about it because at the time I was very young, and I thought, oh, this is my fault because I made the mistake and I was so stupid, and this is all my fault, and it's fine, it's happening to me. But over the years, as I developed and I got older, and I realized, that this is a bigger problem also. There's a lot of white photographers who are doing this to brown and black women, exploiting them. I mean, I didn't make any money out of this, using it for adverts all over. And then I realized also that when I approached the photographer, finally I built up the courage and I told him, I didn't know this. He said, well, you signed away even rights to change your name, to alter the photo, which means they could do whatever they wanted with this photo. And I wouldn't have even known if someone in Canada didn't tell me. And so I eventually got him to take it down. But, there were other people who told me that when they approached the photographer, he said that they had to pay him to take it down. And, it was legal. There was a document. So a lot of me sharing this story was to inform other girls, especially now, I think with Instagram, these ideas of getting the perfect photo and the perfect photographer who can take your photo. Like, you should be aware of what you're signing, because you can be giving away your face. My advert is still popping up. There's highways in Mumbai that people have shown me just like a few weeks ago, where I'm advertising for insurance or something. I don't even know. I don't keep track of it anymore. But you should be aware that there's bigger power plays happening here, and you can be exploited very easily. And so a lot of this book was me trying to reclaim my identity and trying to reclaim who I was, and telling you, this is me. Actually, I'm not the person advertising for teeth whitening, or I've been on dating websites as well, and I've been lucky that it wasn't that bad, but it could have gone very badly for me if my photograph had been misused, even in worse situations. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'll talk. I mean, this is a little overwhelming, and I think we can talk a lot about that. But I'll just steer this conversation a little to the different direction and go back to Rijula and speak to her about, something that I've been thinking while reading your book is that. And you have said that you've written a lot of the book sitting away from Kolkata at very different places. So I mean, in terms of your writing process, how does this distance help you or influence you? Or
I don't know that it helps. Like I have I have no idea, because I've only written one book, and I don't know if I'm capable of writing another. I think we all start from zero every time we start. And I've only ever written the one book that I've written in exile, or in at least 3 different countries. But so I don't know if it helps, but I know that our creative lens, in a way, is formed way before we start actually writing a book. Like it's all all sort of kind of churning away somewhere in the background. And I think that by the time I was probably 19, 20, 21, my creative lens that was going to play itself out in this book was already there, even if I didn't know that. I mean, of course, if you know that as a 19-year-old, you'd be a very insufferable 19-year-old. But looking back, I think that it had formed itself somewhere around there. So it was carrying that, and that's sort of a portable artistic self, because I think all 3 of us, Shabnam, I mean, all of us, we've gone on to live in other places, come back home, not come back home, made our homes in other places. But I think that who we are as artists is something that probably travels with us. And I have to see what kind of books I write, if I write when I'm 60, and I have to see if what I'm forming now in New Zealand travels then. But I think that as artists, we're kind of, as novelists particularly, I think we're always working in a lag. Like, I'm definitely 15 years behind emotionally in my artistic lens. Like I can't write about something that happened to me yesterday. Like that has to, like, percolate in a way that I can't manufacture in a very immediate sense. So I think being aware also means that you have in some way ways of sitting with it, but in some ways it's not very helpful, like temperature, like heat, like sweating, like the weather, the music. And I do worry that my sense of my country, which is my primary artistic space of being, is becoming fossilized the longer I stay away. And I don't want to be one of those authors who's creating an India that doesn't exist, like, book after book. So so I don't know if it helps or it hurts, but it is what it is right now. Hopefully
I must say this is a,
sorry.
it's a
Go ahead.
great read.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to come back to you, Salma, and your book has a lot of women characters. I mean, with very different shades. Okay, so take us through the process of this writing. In terms of when you're talking, how conscious are you about their identities? All of them have this. Are existing at this intersection of gender and race and Indianness or Goan identity. A lot of these are at play. So take us a little bit about this through your process of.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Goan, so I first of all have a very sort of a schizophrenic understanding of my own identity, which is we exist in the liminal space between East and West. So culturally, we're Indo-Portuguese, and ethnically, we're Indian. And the women in the novel, they're different. There's like a first generation immigrant who's the mother, and there's the second generation immigrant who's the daughter. And I do address particularly, it's not the core of the book, but I do have a lot of observations on class, because I think quite apart from color, what affects your experience of being an immigrant is your class. So if you're an affluent British Asian, you're very likely to experience Britain very differently from someone who's not doing so well. And within the British Asian community, in fact, there's quite a lot of pressure to be a success. So if you're not one of those, families who's doing well, who's got their kids in grammar school or private school or at the top universities, there's a certain stigma attached to you. So I do address a bit of that in my writing. And the other thing that the novel does is addresses the sort of changing British Asian identity, because traditionally first generation immigrants, they're labor voters. I'm not sure if that makes any sense to the wider audience, but it's typically your liberal progressive labor voters. But as you become more assimilated, as we've seen in Britain, Asians do tend to turn to the Conservative Party. There's that, change. And I think those are some of the issues that I address, which is, how do we belong? How do we belong to the country we inhabit? How do we belong to its public spaces? How do we belong to its politics? How do we belong to its landscape? So those are issues that interest me. And there's the juxtapositioning of how do first generation immigrants belong, and then steadily second generations, much more assimilated, how do they belong?
Yeah. So uh, thanks for that answer. I'm sorry here. Just, uh, of being a working mother.
No
Sorry.
apologies needed.
So I'll come back to Shabnam here. And Shabnam, one of the things, I mean, in the opening of your book, there's this talk about, I mean, you are dedicating the book to, all the young women who dream. So, I just like quickly like you to talk about, this need for dreaming, and how important it is for women to dream and to fulfill them and to work towards fulfilling them, and what are the challenges, and how has that you have faced.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I always thought when I finished this book, I was going to dedicate it to my grandfather. But when I finished the book and I knew what the book was about, because I think sometimes when you start the book and when you're writing it, you don't know what it's about until the end. When I finished it, I knew I had to dedicate this book to every girl who dreamed, because when I started off the book, I was writing about how I was, as I mentioned earlier, I was reading library books and my grandfather was reading to me all these stories. And I thought, oh, the world is so wide and so beautiful, and I'm going to go and have adventures. And then, I was a girl and I was the fourth daughter in an Indian family. And, I was told, you're not allowed to go anywhere. You're a girl, you're not allowed to travel by yourself. And I was like, but the books told me that I can go out and do and like have experiences. And so a lot of this book was about trying to, just find myself and find who I was. And it was an uphill battle. Like I was only I live with my parents, and they only allowed me to travel, I think, like when I was by myself when I was 27, and I went to go and live in this village in Kashmir. And it was the first time I was alone, and it was mind boggling to me that I could see all these stars in the Himalayas, and I was living with these other people, and I've been waiting for this my whole life. I've been waiting to have an adventure, to do something. And it was hard, for me, coming from here and going to live in a village where you'd have to have bucket baths and the electricity was erratic. But like that was what I was waiting for. And so the whole book is about trying to fight against what I was told as a young girl, that this is your place and this is what you can do and what you can't do. And when I finished the book, I was like, I'm so glad I kept dreaming. I'm so glad I was reading books, because that changed the trajectory of my life. If I wasn't reading these books and I wasn't hoping and imagining, I think I'd be living a very boring life. And I'm very happy with where I am in my life now. Even though people can say, oh, you're still single for so long, you're in your 30s and you're not married, you don't have children. And this book is the reaffirmation to myself and to other girls who have these dreams, that you can do what you want as long as you're happy. And so that's why the book was to all those girls who dream. Just keep dreaming. And if you don't dream, you're going to be stuck with what society tells you to do. And if you're going to be living with what society tells you to do, that's not your life, that's society's life. And what a pity, because you have this gift of having your own life. It's a gift, you should use it well. So yeah, that was why I dedicated it to the girls. And which I'm sure all the other writers here know everything about as well.
So we are running out of time, so on that note, I will probably have to end this discussion today. But I had so many more questions. I mean, it's such an interesting conversation happening here, but I cannot let all of you go without showing your book covers once. So let's all hold, all three of you request you to hold your books and show it to our viewers, and those who I would request everyone to go by and read them. They're wonderful books. And here's to dreaming and to more writing, and good luck with your books. And I had a lovely time talking to you guys.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.